YouTube channel, Facebook page or Twitter feed. So let's crack on.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. We're having a few technical problems with Christine Jardine's video at the moment, but hopefully she will be able to join us in a moment. But welcome to all three of you. Let's crack on with our first question from Sandra in Leighton. Hi, Sandra.
Good evening, Ian. Thanks for taking my call. My question is to the panel is, do you, the panel, agree with the report today about UK is not institutionally racist?
John McDonnell.
No, I don't. I think the report was set up to produce this from the outset. To choose a chair who'd drawn that conclusion a number of years ago, I think, demonstrated what this report was all about. I represent and live in a multicultural community, and there's no doubt about it that things have improved from 20, 30 years ago. We had a member of parliament at that time who was a self-declared racist, and we had the BNP and the National Front. My house was attacked. I had my window smashed at one point by a National Front activist, and so we had all of those issues. Of course, and it has improved. But you can't deny the levels of racism in our society at the moment, and I actually
John, no one is denying that, surely. What the report is saying is that, yes, of course there is racism in our society, and that needs to be tackled. But the accusation of institutional racism, and let's remember, every single commissioner on this commission is from an ethnic minority. They are saying we're not institutionally racist in the way that some people say we are.
Well, it's interesting because one of the commissioners was interviewed later on this afternoon, and seemed to disagree with the chair's remarks from this morning. What I thought was unfortunate, just on a small matter on process, what was unfortunate was that the press release went out there and the briefing went out there before the report. And I was literally now wading through the 250 pages of the report. The report should have been published at the same time properly before this whole narrative got going. As I say, one of the commissioners already was saying, we're not saying there isn't institutional racism in our society. There is, and there clearly is. The evidence is just there. And it was put to the chair this morning, some of the interviews, when someone is going for a job, if you use a normal sort of English name, recognizable English name, you're more likely to get interviewed. If you have a name that doesn't resonate in that way, you're less likely to. If you're a young black person, you're more likely to be stopped on the street. The other one which really worries me, and I've been dealing with this for quite a while, is actually if you're arrested by the police and you go to court, you're more likely to go to prison and you're more likely to have a longer sentence, even though you're in the same circumstances as others. So I think that does reflect an institutional racism. I think we have improved, and that's great, but there's a long way to go yet before we can say we haven't got a number of our institutionals that are racist, institutional racism. I don't think this report has helped at all.
I mean, you used a phrase there, a normal English name. That was a slightly unfortunate thing to say, wasn't it? What is a normal English name nowadays?
That's the whole point, really. That's how people appreciate it, isn't it? They would look at what is the traditional name as against a name that originates within the ethnic minority community. And in that way, discrimination does occur. My wife is Asian, my son is mixed race, he has an English name, McDonnell, he uses that name. All the evidence shows that when you use a name like that as against a name that is considered to come from a historically an ethnic minority background, you'll get an interview. But if not, if your name doesn't resonate in that way, you won't. And that's the reality of it.
Okay.
We've got to say, yes, we're improving all the time as best we can, but I'm afraid there are institutions that remain institutionally racist, and we've got to challenge that.
Okay, Jenny Murray, you've covered issues of discrimination on your radio shows over the years. I'm sure you've covered it in this regard as well. Institutional racism, institutional sexism, do you think they both still exist?
Institutional sexism, yeah, absolutely. But on the institutional racism question, I was really surprised to read the report this morning saying it didn't exist. I mean, yes, I live in a multicultural area of London. Everything has improved in terms of neighbours and friends and meeting in the shops, and there's no evidence of any racism there. But I think one of the most disturbing reports I ever had to cover on Woman's Hour, which was only 18 months ago, was the way women in maternity services, black women, were weeping in the studio with me. It was the days when we were able to actually have people in the studio.
One day, Jenny, one day.
Yes, one day. But just weeping at the mistreatment they had had within the National Health Service. When, we know a lot of ethnic minorities work within the National Health Service, but somehow there was an attitude that pervaded these maternity departments that somehow were saying, well, you're black, this must come naturally to you. And they were having the most terrible time giving birth. That is institutional racism without question, in my view.
I mean, you're right. That was an incredibly worrying report. But what do you put that down to? Because, as you say, in the NHS, that there's quite a high percentage of people from ethnic minorities that work as nurses, doctors, consultants, administrators. How can this be institutional?
I think there's some sort of throwback which seems to affect so many people in those kind of areas that somehow, she's exotic, she would have been in Africa and she would have given birth in the fields and she would have just got up and she would have been absolutely fine. All those ideas that we think are gone, I don't think they are gone. And I don't think I've ever been so upset by listening to, I've given birth twice, had absolutely impeccable care, even 38 years ago it is now. And never feared that anybody would treat me badly and neglect me, not do things properly. But woman after woman after woman spoke to me about being told, oh, come on, you can get on with it. Don't be ridiculous. Stop making a fuss. Or intervention not coming soon enough because it was assumed that somehow it could be done naturally. That is part of an institutional attitude, surely. That can't
Andrew,
be a black midwife being racist towards a black woman giving birth. There's something else underneath it going on.
Andrew Mitchell, so when you hear some of the commentators on this today, I was talking to Simon Woolley, who you will know from Operation Black Vote. It's extremely concerning in that they think this has been effectively, if you forgive the phrase, a bit of a whitewash of a report. And you look at some of the conclusions and you have to say that there aren't very many meaningful ones and recommendations for action.
Well, good evening, Iain, and good evening, Jenny and John. Let me start with what John said, which I think is extremely important, which is that there is no doubt this is against a background of progress being made in this area. And I represent a royal town, which is right on the edge of Britain's second city, Birmingham, which is a huge multicultural success. Birmingham has thrived and prospered over recent years because we have quite outstandingly good relations between the different communities. And so real progress has been made. In Birmingham, that's partly because of the influence of the faith groups, which have been very dominant in ensuring that that is the case. So let's start on the basis that great improvement has been made in recent years. Now, this report is not, of course, a decision of the government. It's a report to government. government. And I have no doubt at all, I haven't read any of it yet, but having listened to some of the reports this morning, that it will create a discussion. And already we've seen some quite negative comments. But I think it's important to keep it in context that it's a report to government, and everyone who's got a view or opinion on this should certainly pile in. And, in Parliament too, for example, I have always been very much opposed to stop and search, as it were, because I think it exacerbates community tension. And I've never really seen an example of why that is a good policy to pursue, or indeed to enhance, which is the current position. And, I'm horrified to hear, I didn't hear Jenny's programme, but it sounded absolutely horrific. But I think the point is we are against the background of this report where things are getting better, and we need to have an open discussion, of which this report is only a part, about where we go next. And then I hope the government will pull all these threads together and ensure that we do start to tackle some of what are undoubtedly clear injustices in terms of the way people are treated, in terms of access to jobs and employment. We have got to make further progress, and I don't think anything in this report should be allowed to suggest that we've made enough progress yet.
But there have been, I think, 9 different reports on all sorts of different aspects of the treatment of ethnic minorities over the last few years. And they're all very worthy. They come up with lots of recommendations as to what should be done. And then they seem to sit on shelves gathering dust. David Lammy has been very critical of, he was commissioned by, I think, David Cameron to do a report on the justice system as it affects ethnic minorities. And the government say they have implemented most of his recommendations. He says they haven't. So, how do we know what the truth is there? But what's the point in commissioning these reports if very little ever happens, Andrew?
Well, I think the language particularly from the Prime Minister about his approach to this report is good. I think it's encouraging. I listened very carefully to David Lammy because I remember when David did that report for David Cameron, and I think what David says is compelling. Indeed, within the House of Commons, he is one of the key voices who people should listen to. And I'm dismayed that his reaction today, which I've seen, is very negative. But I do emphasise that the report is a contribution to a discussion. It's not the answer to any of this. It's a contribution, and people should have their say. And the government, I'm sure, will listen to everything that people have to say before reaching what I hope will be some conclusions which address the point you've just made, because there have been lots of reports, and that, all the intent is good, but we do need to see more action in that respect.
And what about the recommendation that the term BAME is effectively discontinued? Jenny, what was your reaction to that?
I never quite got my head round BAME. I quite often would be writing a script and one of the producers would say, use BAME. And I would say, yeah, but what does it actually mean? Black, Asian, minority, they're all different. If you're Asian, you're not Black African. If you're Chinese, you're neither of those things. It just was never specific enough to give me a pointer to who actually am I talking about here. When I was talking about the Black women and maternity, that was specifically Black women. It was not BAME. The Asian women didn't seem to be suffering in that way. The Chinese women.
And John McDonnell, that's an interesting point, isn't it? We had a caller on last night. I think his name was Erlin Croydon, and he was saying, "I'm not part of a Black community. I am an individual. I want to be treated as an individual." This whole phrase "community," as it relates to different minorities, is absolutely meaningless. Do you think that this BAME acronym has actually outlived its usefulness, even if it ever had one?
It sounds like it. I work on the basis of, what it's up to people what they want to be described as, both as individuals, but also how they want to be described if they want to be considered part of a group. And often a wider expression is used as an act of solidarity. That's how the expression, when people are standing up and say, "I'm Black," it was an act of solidarity, and that extended over a whole range of different people. So I think we have to be sensitive to how people want to be identified, and often they do want their particular aspects to be recognised as well. One other aspect, if I can just throw in as well, the one other group that seems to be almost fair game for discrimination, are Irish travellers as well. And we've seen that in the recent legislation. And we saw that in that appalling report about, it was Pontins, wasn't it, the holiday camp, where they were choosing Irish names to prevent people coming and booking holidays there. So it does go on, and you have to look at very much the specifics as well about how often it's because of our history, and it comes down through culture in which prejudice has sort of got inbuilt and barely recognized by those who are actually discriminating until it's pointed out. And the best way, I think, of it being pointed out is to have honest discussions. But I don't believe this report is a helpful contribution. I actually do think it was the choice of the chair, who's already expressed his view on this issue of institutional racism, and also, I have to say, has made some bizarre statements in the past. I think the choice of the chair actually designated almost what the report would be saying at the end of the day. And I think it will cause more controversy than constructive discussion. I agree with Andrew. We need to make sure everyone piles in as a proper discussion about this, but I don't think this is a constructive way forward, especially we've still got Windrush and the hostile environment hanging over us still. And I thought the best form of reports now are drilling down into real detail and then working constructively as we go, setting us
John,
back.
Thank you very much. A quick response from you, Sandra?
Yes, I heard them. When the report was saying that we're not denying there's not racism, but not institutional racism, is it not the same thing? Because people have the experiences within institutions. So to me, it sounds like a contradictory. It's there. We do have real lived experience, and it kind of bothers me that given that the panel are BAME, to me, I don't know, maybe they were paid to say, I don't know, but, we've got a problem. I'm glad that we have this discussion, regardless of Andrew is saying it's negative. We need dialogue. It's not always going to hear what we want to hear. We need to deal with this because we've got such a long way to go. If we do not deal with these issues, Iain, it will get worse. So we will always have to fight against it. And I'll always say to anybody who does discriminate, anybody, any group you're from, people are here to stay. They're not going away. So we just could have to try and live together because at the end of the day, we're all the same, We've just got to keep fighting for it, for equal justice.
As someone once said, even wrote a book about it, why can't we all just get along? Sandra, thank you very much indeed for that. Now, just to say, Christine Jardine, the Liberal Democrat Home Affairs spokesperson, was supposed to be with us for this hour. Technical issues at her end have prevented her from joining us, so we will have her on in a future week, I can assure you. But that gives more time to each of our three panellists. And I see Andrew Mitchell is doing a little bit of a plug on the screen. Well done, Andrew. You can come back as well. Right, we are going to continue with your questions in a moment. It's 8:18.
This is LBC. Ask Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Let me reintroduce you to our panel. John McDonnell, former Labour Shadow Chancellor, Dame Jenny Murray, the broadcaster, and Conservative MP and former International Development Secretary Andrew Mitchell are with us. Let's go to Simon in Southampton. What would you like to ask, Simon? Hi.
Good evening, panel. How did the panel rate Keir Starmer's first year as leader of the opposition? Do they think that he's left a lasting impression? And is he the man for the job?
Well, I think is it Monday? I think it marks his first anniversary. I'm not going to come to John McDonnell first because I want to give him time to think up a diplomatic answer. Dame Jenny Murray, what's your answer to the question?
Perhaps you would repeat the question.
The question is, how do the panel reflect on Keir Starmer's year as leader of the opposition? Do you think he's left a lasting impression so far, and is he the man for the job?
Now, my knowledge of Keir Starmer goes back quite a long way, because when he was DPP, Director of Public Prosecutions, I used to talk to him a lot about the problems that we were very concerned about then, which of course was rape and all the stuff that we're still dealing with now. Why were there not enough prosecutions? Why were there not enough convictions? And I was always very impressed with him in the efforts he was making in that area. And I was actually delighted when he got the job and thought he was going to be really impressive.
Even though he beat 4 women to the job.
Oh, let's not be sexist about it. I know. Women don't do as well as they should in politics, this is true, but I actually did think he was the best person for the job at the time. He has impressed me once or twice during Prime Minister's questions, because he's been forensic and very clear about his response to the Prime Minister, but he has not come to life in the way I expected him to, and he has not given me a real prospect. What are his plans? What does he want to achieve? Where is he going? And I think he needed to have done that rather quicker than he seems to be doing.
Andrew Mitchell, he started in very difficult circumstances. I think it was the first week of lockdown. I mean, not ideal circumstances for any political leader to come into the job. How do you think he's done so far?
Well, first of all, let me be clear that I think that the job of the leader of the opposition is one of the most difficult, most awful jobs in the world. And I had 5 years sitting alongside David Cameron when he was the leader of the opposition, and it's a terrible, terrible job, and it's extraordinarily difficult. So, having said that, I imagine that the hearts of every single Labour activist and member of Parliament sank to their boots when they read the article that William Hague wrote in The Telegraph, and I think they've all read it, about 2 weeks ago, when he said that Keir Starmer is in exactly the same position as he was in 1997. And, I think there's some truth in that. The Labour Party is very much in flux. And what is the Labour Party's big idea at the moment? It is to help with levelling up. Well, that is the defining feature of Boris's government. It is to level up. It is to explain to people in the red wall seats that we know perfectly well. They've only lent us their votes. They've voted Labour in the past, and we've got to deliver them. So I think he's in an extraordinarily difficult position. And, he is in danger of being painted into the place of being a North London metropolitan Ramona lawyer, and that's not going to resonate. And he's up against a Prime Minister who is a one-off. And, Boris, I remember during the general election going to campaign in some of the red wall seats in the West Midlands. And I would say to people, are you voting Conservative? And they would say, no, I'm voting for Boris. And there's this extraordinary phenomenon in British politics. You only have to look at the reporting over the weekend of Boris. Any other Prime Minister would have been put in a cannon and sent into outer space. Boris is completely different. He's a brand, really. And I think being up against Boris, particularly for a pretty straight-laced character like Keir Starmer, is an exceedingly difficult task. So I don't want to enter into private grief in the Labour Party, but I do think it's a terrible job, and he's trying to conduct it in extraordinarily difficult circumstances when the weather is very much against him.
John McDonnell, you sat alongside Keir Starmer in Jeremy's shadow cabinet for some years. You didn't vote for him as leader. Has he surpassed your expectations or not lived up to them?
You have to be I'm trying to be objective about this. We're 11 points behind in the recent polls. So that has to be a wake-up call that we need to, I think, look at the direction in which we're going in. I think I'm similar to Jenny, really. There's been a sort of line that, the election is a number of years off. We've got time to build the narrative and have a policy announcements later on. I've been trying to say, actually, if you learn the lessons from 2019 general election, what you need to do is you establish your narrative very early on. And it takes a while to develop the point that genuinely that vision of the society you want to create. And then you develop the policy program that demonstrates practically and pragmatically you can achieve that vision. You can't leave that to later. You need to do it now. In addition to that, of course, you've got to critique the government. It's very difficult when you're in a national crisis like this, because people want you to work together. And I think Keir's done well in many respects of saying, look, we will work together, but you also have to critique the government. And I think some of the criticisms now are becoming really apparent, and that needs to be driven home. But when you critique the government, or when you go on air and you say, this is appalling what the government has done, you've got to answer the question. The second question is, what would you do? And at the moment, that's not happening. So what I'm trying to do is urge Keir and the whole Labour, take the shackles off now. Tell us the sort of society you want to create. Paint that picture, and then let's start talking about the real policy programme that will achieve that. And I think that could be quite exciting, but it needs to be done sooner than later. And I've been on your programme before. When Jeremy and I stood down, I made the point then that we mustn't do to Keir what was done to us by, attacking us, attempt coups and all this sort of thing. We've got to be as supportive as possible. And that's what I and others are trying to do. Just say, look, but you need this sense of direction now. That's what people want. And I think, the 10-point policy programme upon which he was elected as leader, which was taking the foundations from our last few manifestos, but then saying we need to build upon it, I think was the right approach. But that needs to be done now. And the issues that are there, in terms of COVID, you can criticise the government about what they did and some of the real mistakes that have been made. But the real issue around COVID is the state of our social care provision and the state of our NHS. Inspire people.
We may come on to that a bit later, but slightly reading between the lines there, which is always dangerous, but you seem to be putting Keir Starmer on a little bit of a warning there.
No, not at all. Don't. You're always trying to get me into trouble, Ian. Without your
no, I don't. You do it very well yourself.
No, I don't need any help usually. I know. No,
I remember Edinburgh.
Yes, that's right as well. Strangely enough, I was in a meeting online meeting in Scotland on Sunday. I said I saved my usual announcements on Scottish policy for Edinburgh Festival with Iain Dale. But anyway, no, I think in all of this, any leader needs words of advice. And constructive words of advice. I'll never get into personal attacks or anything like that. And my words of advice to him is, look, you've got now to demonstrate, just put that vision out there, the society we want. Then you start aiming in the individual policies that will achieve that. And there is so much that needs to be done, so much. And remember, we're coming out of one crisis, and we're now faced with the next one, which is the existential threat of climate change. That's the direction that I think, as the Labour Party, we've got to go in. These huge challenges, and we demonstrating we can rise to them, inspiring people.
Simon in Southampton, what's your verdict on your own question?
I think he's playing a long game. I think he's been put in a position where he's damned if he does and he's damned if he doesn't. But I do think that he's an intelligent guy who, I mean, look, if he hadn't voted to keep the lockdown powers in place, then I would have lost all respect for him, because at the end of the day, his actions have protected people. I know that not everybody will agree with that, but without him, then we would have been in a mess. What I do wish, and this you're going to have to grip onto something tight here, Ian, but I do wish that he would just be honest and say, and I think, to be honest, he wouldn't be on a loser if he was to just come out with it and say that he's going to run on a second referendum manifesto, because Brexit is a disaster. Most of the country don't want it, and I think that would be a good result for him.
Well, John McDonnell's shaking his head. I think after the EU vaccine rollout row, you'd be on a bit of a loser there, frankly, if I may be so bold. But that's another question. We may come on to that later. It's up to you. You drive the agenda. 0345 6060 973. Let's get the latest news headlines on LBC at 8:32 from Andy Ivey.
There's to be an immediate review of sexual abuse in schools after more than 11,000 students shared their experiences on a website. The education watchdog Ofsted will look at safeguarding policies. Campaigners have called a landmark race report insulting, flawed and cynical. The review, which was ordered by Boris Johnson last year, concludes the UK is no longer rigged against non-white people. Schools across France are closing for 3 weeks as part of a new national coronavirus lockdown. In a TV address this evening, President Macron said the measures are needed because the epidemic is accelerating. The weather, some patchy light rain overnight, sunny spells for much of the UK tomorrow, but it'll be warmest in southwest England with highs of 19 degrees.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:36, Andrew Mitchell, Dame Jenny Murray and John McDonnell with me. Barry has texted in to say, I would never vote for him in a zillion years, but I do have a lot of time for John McDonnell. He's my guilty pleasure. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I think it's a compliment, John.
I'll send him some penance by email, isn't it?
Right, let's go to another question. Ian is in Glasgow. Hello, Ian.
Good evening, Ian. How are you?
All right, thank you. What would you like to ask?
Is the resurgence of Alex Salmond in Scotland, is that going to affect Nicola Sturgeon and put a shot across our bows, or will it be literally the end of the union?
What will the effect of Alex Salmond's new Alba party be on Nicola Sturgeon? Will it affect her, or could it mean the end of the union? Andrew Mitchell, I know you follow Scottish politics very closely.
Well, I think that the spat and significant row between Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond is a pretty seminal event. And I say that for this reason, that it casts doubt as to whether or not the SNP, as a campaigning organisation for independence, has actually turned itself into a mature government. And, we see this in the developing world. In South Sudan, for example, and I'm not suggesting that Scotland is like South Sudan, but in South Sudan, you had, for many years, a bunch of freedom fighters fighting for independence of South Sudan, who then never managed to convert themselves from a bunch of freedom fighters into a government. And what this shows, I think, a lot of people in Scotland, is that the SNP is indeed a campaigning organisation for independence, but it's not delivering the sort of balanced governance, the difference between the party, for example, and the government of Scotland, which you see and take for granted in Westminster. And this is a serious matter, because if you're going to argue for independence and you haven't got that basis of good governance in place, it really undermines your argument. And it plays into the hands, too, of what politicians in Westminster say, both Labour politicians and Conservative politicians, that the SNP government in Holyrood should be focusing on health and education and care. And these are the key bread and butter issues: recovering from the pandemic, making sure that Scotland's economy is put on a good footing. So I think those are the issues. Those are the issues which this feud between the two of them have exacerbated and have shown to be very relevant.
I'm going to ask for some slightly shorter answers over the next few minutes so we can fit more questions in. Jenny Murray.
Yeah, I have been in the past very impressed by Nicola Sturgeon. I found her tough, organised, very good at explaining what she's up to, very sympathetic when necessary. And then this spat has just really blown my respect and admiration for her. When she said, when she was giving evidence, that she didn't want to let powerful men get away with things, what did she mean? Where was she going with that? What did she know? Why didn't she remember essential meetings where she should have remembered what was going on? It was such a crucial issue. Women had made complaints. She must have known about it. But sorry, I didn't remember that meeting. The whole thing is a mess and has diminished any kind of respect I had for her ability to govern. Not that I am a supporter of Scotland becoming independent. I like the idea of the union. It's important to me that we have that union. And I can see why they want to go back to the European Union, even though there have been the problems with the vaccine. I was very much a Remainer. But I just think it's a disaster what's going on at the moment. And spat, Andrew, was exactly the right word to use about two grown-ups. What on earth is going on?
John McDonnell, you sat in the House of Commons with Alex Salmond for many years. I don't know how well you know him. Nicola Sturgeon accuses him of just doing it as a matter of self-indulgence and ego. But this could either really damage the independence movement, where they could almost sort of cancel each other out in some ways, or, as Alex Salmond argues, if he gets quite a few MSPs under the list system, that would give the independence movement a super majority and cause a real problem for the unionist parties.
Never underestimate Alex. I've known him a long while and I've worked with him. But the same with Andrew on many issues on a cross-party basis and over the years. And I've always found him incredibly astute, a real tactician. And I think he's been extremely clever on the way he's positioned himself on this as well, actually only standing in the list seats, so he's bound to get representation in the Parliament. And I think what he'll then, and he's pulled across a couple of key SNP members as well. George Keverin, I was speaking on a platform with him on Sunday, and he's gone across to the to Alba or Aleppo as it's pronounced, which I was really surprised at. So I think what Salmond will do is he'll build up support. And he will be the, if you like, he'll try and portray himself as the sort of conscience of the SNP, pushing them towards an independence position more rapidly and trying to expose Nicola Sturgeon in that way. I also think there might well be, if a referendum does come about, I'm like Andrew, my line is, look, concentrate on the issues that before you. That's what's important. But I also, as you know, as I said at you're on the platform with you at that Edinburgh Festival. It's up for the Scottish people to decide whether they have a referendum, and it shouldn't be a UK Parliament that vetoes it. But I think maybe what will happen is Salmond's intervention. It might well be that some of those around him do look for compromises around a third option in that referendum ballot. This issue of radical federalism, which George Keverin is a supporter of. So I think it will shape Scottish politics for quite a while to come. Okay. I think Jenny's right. I think it has damaged Nicola Sturgeon. I'm not sure how much that will be reflected immediately in the polls, but Alex Salmond will keep chipping away at her authority over time. And the one thing I've learned about him, he never gives up. He never gives up. He's consistent, and when he's made his mind up, he can be absolutely ruthless.
Okay, thank you to the panel. 20 seconds from Ian in Glasgow as a response, please.
To be honest, Ian, the last thing Scotland needs is more rabid separatists gerrymandering the second vote. They're trying to get on the list, the same as the Greens haven't got one constituency MSP, they'll come for the second list. They're trying to force their hand, and they're trying to get a minority of people to go on. And to be honest, I know it's just 20 seconds, John McDonnell's sitting there, his demise and him on with Jeremy Corbyn, the demise of the Labour Party where all our supporters have went to the SNP is one of the major reasons that Scotland's in the state it is today.
I think that, to be fair, happened a long time before Jeremy Corbyn got to become leader of the Labour Party. Ian, thank you very much indeed. We'll come to more of your calls in a second on Cross Question. It's 8:45.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
John McDonnell, Dame Jenny Murray and Andrew Mitchell with me answering your questions. Let's take a text from Sarah in Halifax. Is Boris fit for office of Prime Minister after Jennifer Arcuri's claims of their affair? Andrew Mitchell.
Yes, he is. The private life of politicians has always been exotic. In these days, it's much more exposed. The fact is that he is married or is engaged now to someone else. That's something which happened in his past. The issue is whether he is running the country well. And I think that as the vaccination programme shows, we are doing much better than other countries. And he's played a blinder in respect of the vaccination programme. So I don't think the country should dwell on his private life. I think it should dwell on his abilities as Prime Minister and judge him on that and that alone.
I'm tempted to say, when you said all politicians' private lives are exotic, I was tempted to ask how exotic yours is, but that would be impertinent.
Mine, I'm afraid, is extremely dull. But I have been the government chief whip, and I can tell you that the extraordinary lives that are described, for example, by Chips Channon in his diaries, there's still quite a lot of that which has continued down the ages.
But are you not, I mean, to be serious, are you not worried by the allegations that Jennifer Arcuri's company received funding from the taxpayer, that she accompanied Boris on trade trips abroad? It doesn't have a good stench, does it?
But that's already been looked at by two, I think, regulatory panels, and they have said that there isn't a stench there. So I think people should concentrate on his abilities as our Prime Minister and leave his private life aside.
Jenny Murray.
I was horrified when I saw the picture of her in his family home in the kitchen, and then learned all about reading Macbeth as, prelude to sex, having sex on the sofa, leaving just a couple of minutes before his wife came home. I'm sorry, we are in a moment where we are trying to teach teenage boys how to behave towards women and girls. And we discover our Prime Minister, whilst he was Mayor of London, was behaving, frankly, like an oversexed schoolboy, sending sexy texts and having fun and betraying his wife. And then Allegra Stratton, his press secretary, tells us, oh, no, he's always behaved with honesty and integrity and, within the law. Well, hang on. He was married. Doesn't a husband have some sort of legal duty to be decent and faithful to his wife? I am absolutely appalled by what I've read this week there.
John McDonnell.
I agree with Andrew to a large extent in terms of that people have got to have their private lives, but there's two issues that came out of this really. It's all well and good, but if your private life does start impinging upon how you behave in public office, that is key. And Andrew, I think there's been one inquiry, but there is another inquiry going on now by the Greater London Assembly about whether there was any conflict of interest, an undeclared conflict of interest. And I think some of the information that's coming out now, I think, is additional to what was known before. And I think there is a case to answer there. That's the first thing. The second thing as well is that people do judge you on whether you tell the truth or not. And my problem with Boris Johnson, I have nothing personally against him. He's, his neighbouring constituency, happy to work with him on local issues and stuff like that where we can agree. But the issue is I don't think he understands the difference between truth and a lie. I think he's a congenital liar. And I think that is worrying for a Prime Minister. And I've seen it. We've seen it in some of the way he operates politically as well. And that's what worries me about him.
How do you account for the fact that the public seem to just write all of that off? It doesn't seem to matter to people.
Well, with some people, that's exactly right. There's some politicians who are able partly to sort of joke it off and ignore it, etc. I have to say, the media have not been as, I think, as incisive and critical of him as they would have others. I think they seem to treat him with a different standard that they do to others. That's the first thing. But the second thing, actually, sometimes it does begin to count. It might not at the moment. I think it most probably in the long run. But I think Boris Johnson, I don't know what Andrew's view on this is. I think Boris Johnson might be a one-term Prime Minister. I don't think the scale of the work involved will actually he'll want to do for another term.
I think we can predict Andrew's answer. I think we can predict Andrew's answer to that question, unless you're going to surprise me, Andrew, because otherwise I'm going to move on to the next question.
I think that I can see him. I can't really see an end to Boris's reign. I think it's going to be so long.
To coin a phrase, he might go on and on and on. Right, let's go to another question. It's Grace in Horsham. Grace, you've been waiting a long time. Thank you for being patient. What's your question?
Hello. So my question is, Boris said he'd follow the data, not dates. But as the data is looking much better than predicted at this point, with over 30 million vaccinations, which is 53% of the public, adults, isn't it time to advance the lockdown easing?
Isn't it time to advance the lockdown easing, given that we vaccinated so many people? Jenny Murray.
Well, I'm over 70 and I've had one jab. I'm still waiting for my second one, and I am still being very careful because the last thing I want to do is catch the wretched thing at this stage. However, when Boris made his roadmap and declared the 12th of April would be the day on which hairdressers would open, I have never responded to anything so fast in my life. And I
Me too.
An appointment at 12:30 on the 12th of April. If that means I'm muddled about it, I will wear a mask, I promise, when I go to the hairdressers, but I can't wait to get all this hair off. And I'm sure there are lots of people who feel exactly the same.
Well, I'm jealous of all three of your collective barnets, I have to say. John McDonnell, do you think that there is a case for lockdown being eased sooner?
No, I err on the side of caution. I've always been a bit of a hardliner on all of this. And on 3 occasions now, we've been too late locking down. I blame Boris for that as well, I have to say. It was his decision. No, I think we've got to be extremely cautious. Anyone who's had experience within their families or amongst friends, the COVID, both in terms of loss of life, but also long COVID as well, the implications, I think, errs towards caution. And that's my view on this. And things change rapidly. Just also on the vaccinations, let's be clear, the vaccinations at the moment simply protect you from either dying or being seriously ill as a result of the infection. They don't stop you spreading it, do they? They have a limited impact in that sense. Well,
to be fair on that, there is evidence that they do prevent some transmissibility, but not all.
No, not all, exactly. It's not the fail-safe that some people are putting their faith in. So I err on the side of caution on all of this. I keep saying, on the economy, you can revive the economy, but you can't resurrect the dead. And that's why I think actually we have to take it slowly and carefully.
Andrew Mitchell, there are quite a few Conservative MPs who do want to open up earlier. Are you one of them?
No, but I am very, very cautious about the way in which Parliament has given to the executive these extraordinary draconian wartime powers. And so, for example, I declined to support the government on the 6-month extension. I thought a 3-month extension would be sensible. But I'm not in a dissimilar place to the other two panelists, to Jenny and to John, because I think we've got to be cautious and we don't want to blow it now, because we are doing very well on the vaccination programme. The numbers are all moving in the right direction. So my view is we should stick to the roadmap that's been laid out. We shouldn't rush it. Stick to that roadmap, and also to the Prime Minister's words that we are not going to lock down again, and that this is the safe and sure way of proceeding.
Okay, final text question. This is from Denise in Edmonton. Not that one. Tomorrow is April Fool's Day. What is the worst prank that's been played on you? And if you had a choice, who would you choose to prank? Now, that's a good question. John McDonnell, I'm sure you're going to have a really good answer to this.
Well,
no pressure.
This isn't a prank employed on me, but it happened yesterday. And in some circumstances, a friend of mine recently died, Tuther Bone. It was his funeral yesterday. And Tuther was a lovely man. We absolutely loved him. And he enjoyed a joke. And so he left a message he'd like me to speak at his funeral. But he wanted us all to go there dressed in Hawaiian shirts, very bright and all the rest. And I thought, this is Tuther setting me up. I'm going to get there and I'll be the only one in a Hawaiian shirt and everyone else will be solemnly in suits and all the rest. And I thought, this is a classic Tuther joke. Anyway, I got there. I took my suit and a bright shirt as well. But actually, everyone was there in a Hawaiian shirt. So it wasn't a prank, but it was a lovely occasion to remember him by.
I think the revelation there is that John McDonnell owns a Hawaiian shirt. I think we need to see evidence of this.
I didn't have a Hawaiian shirt. I had a T-shirt that was very red and had a slogan on it. It was a Harold Wilson statement that we only win the World Cup under a Labour government.
Oh, goodness me. Right, Andrew Mitchell.
Do you know the April Fool that is etched on my mind is that my younger daughter came rushing into the room and said that her sister had fallen from the window. And, I raced out. I was absolutely horrified. And her sister was lying flat on the ground at the bottom of this window. And, my heart nearly stopped. And then she started laughing and heaving. I mean, it was a very, very naughty April Fool that only a very young girl could get away with. And so if you're asking me, secondly, whom I would wish to retaliate with an April Fool, it would be my younger daughter.
Well, tomorrow's your opportunity. Jenny Murray, has anyone played a practical joke on you in a radio studio?
No, thank goodness. They
wouldn't dare.
Has somebody done that to you?
No,
that would be really,
I shouldn't have put the idea in their head, should I?
No, what the worst one I had, I mean, I have two sons. They're now quite grown up and not as naughty as they were when they were little. They somehow found out from someone at school that it would be a really good idea to put cling film over the toilet and put the seat down. You can imagine. That was just the worst.
I'm tempted to ask number ones or number twos, but I'm not going to because that would be very inappropriate.
I assure you it's only one.
I always like to finish the programme on a high note. Thank you to my panel, John McDonnell, Andrew Mitchell and Jenny Murray. If you missed any of the programme, you can catch it up on the Cross Question podcast or on Global Player or on the LBC YouTube channel. Coming up in a moment, we're going to return to the subject of the report of the Commission on Race today and get your views on that. It's 9:01.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the government has announced an immediate review of sexual abuse in